Video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So just practicing it now.
Late during while
Just
we
when I
talk.
feel like it.
Yeah. So wonderful. Today we're joined by Jeff CALLENDER. Jeff, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
I've been following your journey for a very long time, and I've always been impressed by your lectures at the school here on strategy,
Yes,
which is
indeed.
a very important part of every organization, whether small or big you are, right? So Jeff, what an amazing bio you have.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm looking at that. I'm like, wow, it's like too many countries. I mean, 54 countries, 160 projects
Yeah.
since 1991. So just correct me if I can see here. You're a lecturer, an experienced like a consultant.
Yeah.
You've been a designer, learning programs. You work at Henley Business School.
That's true.
You've worked with, you started your journey in Amazon. Is that right?
It is
In
the
North
engineering.
Sea, as
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah.
And then you went on to you're also a director of the company?
I am. But I should say I was until June of this year. I've sold
Okay.
that business.
Wonderful. That's great. Good to hear that.
Well, it's been cathartic more than anything else, but another learning experience after 25 years or thereabouts.
Wow. So then you then move on into consulting, right?
Well, no, those were always parallel.
All right. Okay.
In fact, the consulting started before the engineering, or before the directorship of the engineering company, and I was roped in by an old colleague to start that business. So I did that in parallel, totally schizophrenic.
So some of the blue chip I can see there's like too many to mention. I'm just going to get a few out there. We got Nestle, Barclays,
Yeah.
right? You work with them, and there's a full list. We're sure we'll get that in the description later. And then you also Spanish speaking and Portuguese.
Yes, because
Oh,
I grew up in Brazil, so that's my home actually.
Right.
So
Okay. And
that's,
and we met here in Southampton.
indeed.
How amazing! I'm from
Indeed.
Mauritius. You're from
Yeah.
Brazil. Man,
Yeah.
that's just amazing. Great. So, Jeff, we're here today to talk about strategy.
Yes.
And during my last 20 years, even in my own life, and looking at people that I work through now through our program, the Leaders program, I do come across a lot of people who seem to be shifting from job to job, career to career, and then at some point they get overwhelmed and they are lost. All that because when I asked them, what went wrong, it seems to me it's something right from the beginning. There was no plan.
Yeah.
Right. So tell us more about, first of all, what is a strategy?
Well, that's a great place to start because, first of all, it's a very abused terminology. It's used, and often in most circumstances, it is actually just a plan per se, but usually an action as opposed to actually a strategy. What we tend to think of as strategies, or what we are doing is the how.
Okay.
Actually, what a strategy starts with is the why. And in this context, particularly with the research I've done, is you find that people have shopping lists of things they want to or they're doing, who they believe might be advancing their career, but they're not entirely clear about where they're going.
Right.
And a strategy, going back to, of course, you'll be well familiar from a military standpoint, is you have to establish a goal first.
Correct.
And the goal has to be established based on facts. What happens is, even myself, we kind of bumble through life.
Okay.
And then you take an action, but the action may be very difficult to implement simply because the goal is unclear, or it's overly ambitious, or it's not within the current capabilities or the skills, etc., that you have. So when I described strategy to people, whether it's a business strategy or just working with strategies itself, it's really clear, we need to make it clear that you start with where do you want to go, and that is part of strategy. And in fact, one of the acid tests for strategy is there has to always be more than one way to get there.
Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Right?
And therefore, if you have a goal, there should be what we would call in business strategic options to get there.
Yeah.
And some may be direct and some may be indirect. So in the case of careers, you may be switching different functions, different capabilities, etc., all building a portfolio to reach an ultimate goal, and that in itself is a strategy.
Okay.
So interesting, because it is so poorly used as everything's a strategy, and yet it's
Especially
obviously not
nowadays,
called
we
out.
have a very crowded market.
We do.
There's about 6 generations in the workplace. You know, we've maybe 6 years. The Gen Z are joining now this
Yeah.
year. So it's becoming a lot more important for anyone, especially mid-careers,
Yeah.
to have a strategy to get to where they want to go, the goals, right?
Well, and one of the interesting things about that is the fact that my kids, yours as well, it is a crowded market, and therefore there is far more emphasis in thinking through how you're going to make yourself be able to stand out. But of course, we have the generation of fake it till you make it type
Yep,
thing as
correct.
well. And, you know, to be fair, that is a strategic option. But I would always put that as plan B.
Plan B, that's right.
One of the core elements is for people to think about, if they are in that crowded market, what does that mean? What is it that is necessary to
So
make
we're talking
stand
about
out?
the recipe for a good career strategy here.
Yes, we
Right,
are.
okay.
And you and I may not have had to do so. So if I take education as an example, it was that if you were a graduate, that stood out from in the normal picking process.
Yeah.
Then it became you had to be do graduate studies, do it in business and MBA to stand out.
Yeah.
Now even that's watered down. I read a statistic a while back. I think that China is producing something like 80,000 MBAs a year, and you know, there's not necessarily a job for that type, and that's a sad thing, because obviously over preparation can be a very debilitating and very discouraging thing. Over preparing for
Yeah.
roles that actually you're not in a position to be able to get yet.
So tell us about the strategy development model that you have, the the calendar model, you call that. How would that be applicable to someone in transition?
Well, that's a useful thing to talk about because if you can get, often people who I'm dealing with in business aren't getting their own business career strategies correct, and yet they're leading organizations
Right.
with so-called development of,
Yeah.
of strategy. And it comes back to that misunderstanding of what that really means. So if we look at typically companies saying, we want to grow by 10%. Well, first of all, I hate round numbers. So usually poor work has gone into that.
Right.
But if the market, if you look at worldwide GDP, it's in decline. So if you are trying to grow by 10%, but the market is only growing at 2%, that's a real, kind of big leap. In the same way with careers, if you haven't understood what the market needs, if you haven't understood who are those people who are competing against you, and you haven't really then said, what can I draw out of that? We haven't even talked about how you're going to get there yet.
No, not yet.
You need to figure that out. Get then and
Right
say,
from the beginning.
what's the realistic outcome?
Yeah, yeah.
Short, medium, long term.
Okay.
And getting that, using the wheel, is really a part of describing that you look at the market, you look at your competition, you make an assessment, then you can develop your personal goals. And this works in personal life as well as it does in taking a career.
Right. Okay.
As such, once you do that, what are the different ways I can get there?
That's the plan A, the plan B, plan C.
And then it opens up creativity. The reason this is important is because guess what? All that homework you did before, you'll start to see strategies fall out of it. You'll start to understand why there is the competition in terms of the jobs and things that you're pursuing.
That's right.
You understand why the market has these gaps. I remember years ago there was a statistic that showed there was a shortage of anesthetists in America. And there was one group of immigrants who found that that was a gap.
Okay.
And today, that population is dominant in that field. And that was only because they looked at the marketplace.
And it seemed like we know we have a crisis of engineers right now in the UK. Actually, probably worldwide as well. There's a need of more engineers. So what would be the, I have a saying about without a strategy, a career change like a shot in the dark.
Yeah, I mean, as I said,
you-
I think we all suffer from bumbling along.
Yeah.
It's not a crime. It's part of the world. And we have changes, and that's also important with strategy. In business, we review our strategy, and I often ask, well, how often do you review it? What's the good term? Well, we do it every 3 years.
Yeah.
Why 3 years? It makes no sense. You review it when the market changes or is signaling its changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you are not a slave to 3 years, you're a slave to understanding when things happen. So as we go through life, there's a very interesting Professor Hunt who described the fact that you get hired on one basis: skills, capabilities, and attitude.
Okay.
But as you go through your career, you start to maybe take on debt, you get a mortgage, you have a child, you get married, whatever.
Responsibilities,
Every
right.
one of those changes
Yeah.
your aspirations and your energy and various other things. Those are all great times to review.
And the market, as you know, we're both in business, is changing every 18 months, right?
Well, yeah.
So if you're in a career now, you got to know where this is going.
But there are parts of that some things are changing very quickly. Others take a long time. So I recently read a paper, an academic paper, about high velocity business environments. And the author of the research quotes that all these industries, including like biotech, are fast, high velocity environments. Well, no, they aren't. They are once we see them.
Okay.
But they've been 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in development. And the venture capitalists will tell you that often they're accused of short-termism.
Yeah.
And yet you don't see how long it took to get to these points.
there.
Then, of course, once a particular technology is developed, it starts to cascade quite rapidly. But it didn't happen overnight.
So would you be saying that a strategy brings clarity and confidence for someone to have the courage to go ahead and do what they like to do in life?
Well, I think confidence is the word. Clarity is always an interesting thing, is because, we have, if we know where we're going, it builds confidence.
Yeah.
How sure we know that destination is going to be realized, there's still a bit of a gamble in it. And as I say, there's bumps along the way. In fact, it's fascinating that we draw straight lines for everything. And we know in life there's no straight lines.
No straight line, we know that. Yes.
So opportunities arise, changes in organizations arise. You're offered a job here, you're made redundant there. These things happen. So does it add clarity? I would say what it does is make more clear. It's one of that classic thing. It's easier to change a decision if you know you've already had a decision.
Yeah.
Or the short version is that, even a bad choice at least is something you can work against.
And also that not making decision is actually making decision.
Yes. So often when I'm talking to companies, I go, did you evaluate just doing what you're doing?
Yes.
Oh no, we have to do this, we have to do this.
Wow.
Actually, sometimes your customers would rather you do what you do
Else. Yeah, that's
if
right.
you do it well.
Yeah, that's right. So to close on that, you would say that the strategy, a career strategy, starts right at the beginning. If you're thinking that the role you are in, the job you're in, is perhaps not going where you would like to go, and so that's the time to start thinking and having a roadmap, a plan, a strategy to where you would like to go, and use that plan.
Fall back, regroup.
Yeah.
Look at where the ambitions have transpired or occurred over that career so far.
Yeah.
Is it realistic some of the expectations? Have you built the capabilities that are needed to pursue? And be honest, certain things is we see so often, a good salesman becomes a sales manager and is a disaster.
Okay.
Or a technical person who's very competent becomes a leader and is a disaster. And those are so sad. But of course, the organizational environment that they're working in gets you in the hype. In fact, I listened to a podcast here coming up here this evening, which says actually people's anxiety in terms of perception of how fast things change hasn't changed since the First World War.
Wow, how interesting is that? Okay.
That we've always been busy and we've always been anxious and we've always seen changes in strategy or in technology, etc., accelerating. It's not new. And therefore, we've got to be careful not to be part of the hype.
That's a great line. It's wonderful. So what you're saying is keep up to date with what's happening in your industry.
Yes.
With technology, how this is affecting your industry, your career, your job descriptions, and then start having a plan and a strategy to what you would like to do, what I call the career sweet spot. Find out based on your talent, your skills, and figure out where you would draw this list first before moving to the next level.
And can I just add one last thing that's really critical? 360 degrees, you got to get feedback. What we think we're good at, what we don't, excelling on what we do well, minimizing those things you don't do well. Don't fall into the trap. If you don't feel comfortable doing something, you do need to make that critical decision. Do others think I'm not doing really well in that? Because you might be surprised. They think you're actually very good. Or if the feedback is reinforcing it, I guess you've got to make that decision to change. Change direction, change capabilities, whatever.
Very true.
But the essence of any strategy is getting information. And I even reinforce that is getting insight. Particularly, as we said, in a crowded market, what can you do differently? When you go to an interview, if you haven't researched the company, you're not going to stand out from the rest of the people.
Definitely not.
If you have researched the company, what could you say if they ask the question, what would you do with our company? What would you say?
Exactly.
Have you made an evaluation to say what you could create in terms of value?
That's being entrepreneurial.
Well,
that's where we're heading right now, isn't it? Most people want people not to clock in 9 to 5, but to bring in insight that will progress the overall organization.
Contribution. They're looking for contribution.
That's the way we are heading in the marketplace.
And that's the way to differentiate yourself. It isn't don't go in criticizing the business. Go in seeing how you can make a positive contribution.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for coming and joining me here today at the school. And I look forward to your session again.
Excellent.